my brother Rolf Keltner. He was 1 year younger than me. And we had this wild brotherhood. We grew up in this wild part of LA in the late 60s and then in the country. We came from this complicated family, and he was like my moral compass. He taught me about moral beauty and kindness. He always protected kids from bullies. He was a speech therapist and taught really poor kids how to talk. He just was a very good human being. The night that he died of colon cancer, he was lying there and we all gathered around him, and he was in this bed and he looked really peaceful. He was smiling slightly. His face looked relaxed. We touched him and said things to him. And his breathing would change rhythms as we said things to him. But he was unconscious. And then he passed away. And in that moment, like the light felt different and the space, felt like it was pulsating and like he was being drawn into something. To look at someone you love die, all I could say was like, I feel awe at the mystery of the end of life.
Most of us associate the emotion awe with seeing something grand or unimaginably beautiful, the colors of an exquisite sunset, or the splendor of Mozart's Jupiter Symphony. But in this moment of his brother's passing, scientist and author Dacher Keltner came to realize that there's more to this emotion.
What does an evolutionary, biologically focused scientist make of it all? I could reduce it to activation in his cells, and that would go, and he'd go into the earth, and that would be it. And then when he died, I was like, no, there's a lot more here. And it opened my mind and it liberated me.
It's not about beauty. It's about wonder. The wonder that makes us appreciate life, gives us hope, even in its most difficult moments.
And I took real heart and felt solace that that's a human universal.
We feel sad because we lost someone. We feel proud because we won an award. But as Dacher came to realize, awe isn't so much the end result of something as it is the beginning of a journey, a way to grow, to grapple with something that seems impossible to grasp, a way to transform our understanding of the world, ourselves, and our place in it. Put simply, awe offers a way forward if we're willing to take those first few steps.
My brother was my guide to awe.
Of all the emotions humans can experience, it's the one that feels most mystical, most tied to something greater, to creation, to love, to meaning, and for some, to the divine. But where did this emotion come from? Are we wired to be spiritual? Is awe a key to unlocking our better selves? Welcome back for Season 4 of How God Works. At a time when the world seems in constant flux, when things feel like they're about to spin out of control, we're going to be taking a look at how spiritual wisdom and the science behind it can help us rebalance not only our sense of ourselves, but maybe even the world around us. From finding flow and connection in our daily lives, to combating climate change, racial strife, and the teen mental health crisis, we've got lots of big conversations ahead. On today's episode, we'll talk more with Dacher Keltner about the origins of awe, how it affects our bodies and minds, and the ways it can inspire humility and wonder that can open us up for the journey ahead.
What's emerging in the social scientific literature is that awe is this pathway to growth.
And we'll hear from psychologist Pier Carlo Valdesolo about how awe works its magic and why it's been at the heart of spiritual experiences for about as far back as we can see.
It has this component of the unexplained, being in the presence of something that is so powerful, this feeling of submission and being small. This is why you see awe experiences in the domain of religiosity.
It's going to be awesome. I'm Dave DeSteno, and this is How God Works. Dacher Keltner is a professor of psychology at UC Berkeley and author of the new book, Awe, The Science of Everyday Wonder and How It Can Transform Your Life. In a lot of ways, Dacher and I are cut from the same cloth. For one, we both host PRX podcasts. Dacher's is The Science of Happiness, which is fantastic. Check it out if you're looking for ways to bring more joy and harmony into your life. For another, we have the same day job. We're both social psychologists who study how emotions guide people's decisions and behaviors. But there's one thing that separates us: awe. It's one emotion I've never studied, mostly because I thought it seemed like too mysterious a feeling to go after. Kind of like trying to capture lightning in a bottle. After all, awe is the reaction we have to things that are powerful and mysterious, that knock us a bit back on our heels and challenge our understanding of the world. So when it came to studying awe, Dacher was cleverer than me. He felt the usual methods scientists like us use couldn't quite capture the experience he felt at his brother's passing. So to get a deeper understanding of it, he tried a different method: stories. He interviewed hundreds of people across continents and cultures, and came to realize that awe comes from what he calls the 8 wonders of life.
We started with this definition of awe, that it's an emotion you feel when you encounter vast mysteries, and it has these subjective qualities. And then, we started to get serious about what philosophers will call the intentional object of the experience. Like, what's it about? And I had intuitively thought that awe was largely about nature and spirit. And so in the spirit of new social science, worried about Western samples and the like, we gathered stories of awe from 26 countries, from Mexico to Brazil to Japan to China, India, US, Russia. And then we gathered together speakers of 20 languages at Berkeley and translated these stories and then classified them. And it took years. And we came up with what I call in the book the 8 wonders of life, which are the sources or domains of awe. And they are really striking. Most common is moral beauty, other people's kindness and their courage and their ability to overcome hardship, nature, collective effervescence or synchrony. And then we get to the cultural stuff of music, visual design, architecture, art, visual art, and spirituality. And then we get to these 2 interesting categories, less common: big ideas. We had I love this Japanese student who, his narrative of awe was he was in a natural history museum and he suddenly got a sense of evolution, like, oh my God, we're all evolving, And then, the one that just shook me to the core was the last wonder of life and death. And around the world, people write about having babies and being a grandparent and seeing little fingers and hands and eyes of newborns and young children, and then dying. People around the world wrote very similar stories. I remember one from Indonesia of a young guy sitting there watching his mom pass.
But there's something else that makes awe unique, even paradoxical when it comes to emotions.
So it is this oscillation between small self and being emerging with the vast. So that's one of these paradoxes about it. And then the other is, in some sense, it is horrifying and terror-producing awe. And about a quarter of experiences of awe have serious elements of fear. Religious experiences, psychedelic experiences out in nature, experiences with charismatic leaders. It instills fear. So it is this mixture of both the spirit of wonder and exploration and the sense that beautiful things are to be appreciated, and at the same time, it can feel horrifying. And there's this scientific literature showing, and we've done some of this, that there are really 2 kinds of goosebumps or sort of chills. One is the shudder of horror, right, where you feel alone and alienated. And another is this spine-tingling chills that rushes up your back and up your head and your arms. And that really, it more closely tracks with awe as opposed to horror.
So what function do you think it serves? Why do we have it?
Yeah, evolutionarily, one of our defining strengths is our sociality, our hypersociality. some of the fundamental challenges to the reproduction of our genes, which is to get our offspring to the age of viability, to share food during food scarcity, to warm our bodies in the face of real cold, to defend ourselves, we did best collectively. A fundamental purpose of awe is to move us to understand reality together. There's this literature on collective intelligence coming out of MIT and other places that, man, with the right group dynamics, we can be really smart collectively. And the other one's more subtle. Your former student, I think, Piercarlo Valdesolo, has data on this, and there are other studies that awe helps us see patterns out there in the world. So cognitively, awe shifts us out of this narrow focus on threat and self-interest to what are the big systems of life that I should relate to, like an ecosystem or a cultural system or my group or an idea, an intellectual system, like I really care about equality or eliminating racism. So awe opens our minds to these big systems that we should be relating to as part of life. A spiritual system. How do I make sense of life and death and what I think of as the soul? So awe really shifts our minds and then our social behaviors.
I think one of the reasons awe plays such a big role in spiritual experiences is exactly because it has these two parts. It makes us willing to try to look for answers to things we don't understand, to be open to new possibilities, while also, and here's the essential part, pushing us to do it together. It makes us feel closer to other people, safe, protected, and cared for. It's the same way most people describe mystical experiences, mind-opening or even mind-blowing, while also feeling a deep connection to everyone and everything around them.
I had to write a chapter on mystical awe because it's a pretty pervasive and universal experience. And I read various accounts of mystical awe. Julian of Norwich and her love of Jesus, and in the Bhagavad Gita and the revelations to St. Paul and the Buddha and more contemporary writings. Even Wordsworth, his kind of mystical relation to nature in the Prelude. And it's interesting, Dave, when you find these pieces of spiritual experience, even in the psychedelic literature, and it has this flow of awe to it, right? Of encountering vast and mysterious things in different languages, and then sort of the dissolving of the self, the opening of the mind, the sense of wanting to be good. And so that tells us that awe, like Emerson had argued, is these feelings, these transcendent feelings, are part of our spirituality.
William James, the father of modern psychology, said, "Religious awe is the same organic thrill which we feel in a forest at twilight or in a mountain gorge." You can take this to mean that the awe some people feel at seeing Jesus on the cross is the same as others feel from seeing the Milky Way in the night sky. But what if there's something a little more to it? What if these two types of awe aren't just the same, but interrelated? What if feeling awe from viewing nature, dancing in the rain, or listening to a swelling symphony makes us more open to religion itself? We'll take a look at that when we come back. Piercarlo Valdesolo is a psychology professor at Claremont McKenna College. And Carlo is also an old student of mine. So as you might guess, one of the things he studies is emotion. But unlike many of the emotions he studies, awe is kind of special.
I think it's probably one of the few emotions that studying emotions hasn't completely ruined for me in terms of the experience.
Yeah, sometimes spending long hours at the computer can take the joy out of anything you study. But like Dacker, Carlo's scientific interest in awe hasn't diminished its effect on him.
I think it's probably just always been my favorite emotion to experience, either through art or through nature, and it's something I've always gravitated towards.
Carlo isn't a particularly religious guy, but his work on awe is starting to unlock the mysteries of how and why it's so closely tied to spirituality.
It's an emotion that has, for a long time, been associated with spiritual experiences, the idea of an epiphany, an epiphanic experience, that seems to really be about feeling awe, like being in the presence of something that is so powerful and difficult to understand and wrap your head around. That's kind of the crux of this state. In one of the first theory papers in psychology that I'm aware of, Dacher Keltner and John Haidt suggested that this is why you tend to read about, see awe experiences in the domain of religiosity, because it has this component of the unexplained, this feeling of submission and being small.
In some of his earliest writing about awe, Dacher theorized that it was exactly this characteristic, the pairing of the unexplainable with a feeling of submission or being small, that made awe such a perfect fit with religion. So Carlo decided to put Dacher's notion to an important test. His question wasn't just whether awe is associated with spirituality, but something a little more provocative. Could it actually make people more open to religion? Could it make them believe a bit more in, well, God? To find the answer, Carlo first had to find a way to get people to feel awe in the lab.
Any emotion in a lab setting is a hard thing to do, as you taught me when I was a grad student with you, Dave. You got to put in a lot of work to try and identify the precise conditions that you believe elicit the emotion you want to elicit, and do your best to try and prevent other strong emotions from also being elicited.
When you can't take your research participants to the Grand Canyon to let them feel awe, you do the next best thing.
The wonder of the natural world.
We used a trailer for BBC's series Planet Earth, a bunch of different scenes of vast natural beauties, ranging from deep ocean images to images of the savannah, images of outer space. I mean, you name it, it's in there.
And a beautiful score underneath it all.
And a beautiful score. We assigned some participants to watch this awe-inspiring video, some participants to watch a generally positive, amusing video, and then some participants to a neutral condition. After they watched these video clips, they reported their belief in a number of different kinds of supernatural forces, belief in curses and ghosts and miracles, in karma, and then also a question that asked explicitly about their belief in God. What we found was that participants in the awe condition reported greater belief in supernatural forces and belief in the idea that supernatural forces could control events that unfold on Earth, and also greater belief in God.
To me, right here, in this finding, is something profound. Feeling just a little awe nudged people's minds toward the belief that something greater, something spiritual, might be out there. Now, don't get me wrong, these modest experiences of awe aren't going to turn an ardent atheist into a devout believer. As Carlo found in another set of experiments, feelings of mild awe didn't make people who strongly reject religion more likely to see the hand of God at work in the world. But among those who were open to the idea of God, it did just that. It made the spiritual, however people chose to define that, seem a bit more probable. So, in a sense, is it fair to say that awe pushes us to try and find explanations for things we don't completely understand?
So in that original study, and a couple of follow-up studies, we were looking at, why does this happen? Why is it that awe increases belief in supernatural forces? One possibility is just that it's like conceptually associated with this domain. I make you feel this emotion, and because of its conceptual relationship to religion and spirituality, you're just going to feel a little bit more close to that kind of belief system. Another possibility is that, and this is the one we were interested in, that awe is associated with a feeling of uncertainty. That when you feel this emotion, you're also feeling like you're having a hard time understanding what you're looking at or trying to, or perceiving. And in that sort of state, in a state of uncertainty, psychologists know that motivation number one is to reduce that feeling of uncertainty.
And throughout history, one way we humans have tried to explain things we don't understand is to assume there is some purpose, some hand behind those events. And here too, Carlo's research has shown that when people feel awe, they tend to see more patterns, more agency behind things that are random. For example, when he ran studies that asked people to decide whether strings of digits appearing on a computer screen were randomly generated, which they were, or generated by people, those who were feeling awe were more likely to assume a human in another room was punching the number keys. Why? Because they believed there had to be a purpose, an intention behind the numbers that appeared. But does this tendency to look for causes, to look for agency behind things when we feel awe, mean we're wired to seek the divine?
Yeah, I think maybe I'd say it as we are wired to seek out explanations that are available to us. And to the extent that throughout our history, the explanations that have been available to us are those spiritual, supernatural ones, then yeah, it makes a lot of sense why we see over the course of human history this connection between awe and the divine.
On this point, Carlo's and Dacker's work agreed.
This is one of the deep human universals that almost every culture that's been studied has a sense of the divine or spirit and soul and God and gods and, spirit residing in animals and, natural forces and rivers and the like. A lot of the great ethical spiritual traditions write about that. Lao Tzu, Taoism, the Tao, this mysterious life spirit force is in nature and so forth. And I think that, the awe literature really helps us sort of think about this universality of the human predilection to think about the soul and spirit and God, because it is this feeling state that we have very often. And in our work, we've surveyed people in 26 countries. You see this across religions of like, I am awestruck by the mysteries of spirit, or how I see, 40% of Americans, they go out into nature and they are backpacking or gardening and they're like, man, the light on the plants and the spring blossoms and all of this together is divine, is spirit. They feel that.
Well, and that to me is the amazing part about it. It is pan-human, as you're saying, it is cross-cultural, but it's also a different experience than people often get. You go to church or temple and say your prayers. Emerson has his famous lecture that he gave at Harvard Divinity School where he said, these aren't the words he used, but he basically said, institutionalized religion is kind of stale. People, to really experience the divine, you need to be out in nature. You need to experience that wonder and let it flow through you. And I think that's that common part, because you're saying people of all religions talk about this, even though their doctrines and their dogmas are different. It's that kind of door into the mystical experience. When it comes to awe, how you define the transcendent isn't that important. Whether it's God, spirit, or nature in all its splendor, the point is to feel that wonder, to let it renew you in mind and body. Research by Dacker and his colleagues shows that feeling awe makes us better, healthier versions of ourselves. It makes us more generous, more kind, less materialistic, and more patient. And on a physiological level, it reduces stress. It slows our heart rates and deepens our breathing. It can even quiet our brain's inner critic. All of this, of course, leads to another question. If awe is so good for us, how do we get more of it?
There are emerging awe practices, but I think it's really two things. One is an awe mindset, and that really involves, pausing, breathing, not naming or labeling or fitting things into your expectations, and then wondering, and asking questions. And the best guide to that was Rachel Carson, and she wrote an essay, How to Teach Your Child to Wonder, and that's the essence. It's like, go out into the world, pause, look around, and reflect and look to what's curious about it. If you're looking at an ocean, ask yourself questions about tides or what are waves, etc. And we've added to that as a part of the awe mindset. I think it's really helpful is to move your attention from small things to vast things. If you're looking at an ocean, right, look to the point where the wave breaks and then pan out and think about all the patterns of waves. Look to, the one cloud and look at the clouds as a system in a sunset. Listen to one note in music and then understand the whole system. And then the second part is to do what I did grieving my brother Rolf, which is look at those 8 wonders and find a couple minutes, regularly of them. What music brings you tears? Who's a person of moral beauty to you that, look for ordinary kindness out in the streets. I was just walking here in New York City, and I saw this guy quickly open a door for an elderly woman and just reflect on that. Get out in nature, find visual patterns that are good for you. And a lot of data speak to the health and well-being benefits of that. A couple of minutes of awe, diminishes the default mode network and its loud voice of self-criticism. A couple of minutes of awe activates the vagus nerve, and that's good news for your heart. A couple of minutes of awe, one study finds a little bit of oxytocin release. A couple of minutes of awe, well, this is correlational. More awe is correlated with less inflammation in your immune system. And then the well-being benefits, less stress, less pain, less loneliness, right? If I go out in nature and I marvel at a tree or fungi, I come back, I'm like, I feel like I have a strong community around me. So it's, Vivek Murthy wrote about awe in his book. He's our Surgeon General. And he's like, this may be one of the 21st century tools that we curate to help with the struggles of this century.
Albert Einstein once said, "The most beautiful thing that we can experience is the mysterious. It is the source of all true art and all science. He to whom this emotion is a stranger, who can no longer pause to wonder and stand wrapped in awe, is as good as dead. His eyes are closed." Awe is a link to the transcendent. And while the ways we define that term can vary, the power of the feeling can't be denied. Awe shakes us out of our psychological ruts. It humbles us. And in so doing, opens our minds to experience the wonders around us. It also reminds us that we're all trying to figure out how this world works. None of us has all the answers. But together, we can go in search of them and find joy in that journey, wherever it leads. I hope you like this first episode of Season 4 of How God Works. If you did, let us know. Throw us some stars in Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Tell your friends, your kid's teacher, your dentist, your priest, rabbi, or imam. Reviews and good old-fashioned word of mouth really helps others find the show. Next time on How God Works, when it comes to taking action on climate change and caring for the environment, religion can be a double-edged sword.
It is true that a lot of the data we see on religion and environmentalism is mixed. Some seems to show this negative association, and others the exact opposite.
We'll talk to a psychologist about what can make the difference.
The more connected you feel to God, the divine, other people, that is going to be associated with a lot more concern about the environment and environmental action.
And to a reverend and environmental activist about how he inspires people to view caring for the earth as a sacred duty.
Surely, if God has called us to do this, if God entrusts us with the stewardship, the care of this planet, then whatever God's going to do in the end, it's our responsibility to look after it now.
How God Works is hosted and written by me, Dave DeSteno. Our senior producer is Josie Holtzman. Our producer is Sophie Eisenberg. And executive producer is Genevieve Sponsler. Merritt Jacob is our mix engineer and composed our theme, with arrangement by Chloe DeSteno. The executive producer of PRX Productions is Jocelyn Gonzalez. This podcast was also made possible with support from the John Templeton Foundation. If you want to learn more, you can follow me on Twitter @DavidDeSteno.